one.
Welcome to Midwifery in the Sip, where we highlight birth work in Mississippi. I'm your host, Francine.
And this is your host, Adriana.
What's up, Adriana? What you sipping on today?
Today is coffee because it's a coffee kind of day. But thank God it's Friday.
Okay. Girl, I ain't sipping on nothing because we having some plumbing issues and my husband had to turn off the water this morning and get
Oh,
stuff worked.
Lord.
So I ain't even got no water to make my tea, but that's okay. That's okay.
Listen, I'm any husband and like at least let us get some drinks or something.
Exactly. Like, man, could I get my tea together before we do all of this? But
Oh my gosh.
girl, it's been so much stuff going on. And I've been thinking about what it means to protect birth in a system that is failing mothers.
Yes, it's definitely filling mothers. And that's the sad part about it is we got to get political when we're talking about this because when it comes and boils down to it, it's political and birth is political. Okay.
But what's up, Adriana? Because you know, a lot of midwives are like, I don't want to mess with that political stuff. I'm not into politics.
I think we need to give the people, a history lesson of how we got here, though. I mean, come on. When you look back at the history of midwifery and how it started, and it started on the same premises of the country that we're in, the
Mm,
US, racism, classism, slavery, all those things. And they are written into the constitutions, which the constitutions also have a lot to do with how policies are made in America and the medical system here. And when you're looking at how all of this falls, everything, especially birth in the South, is political about it. Birth is political. Like you cannot discuss it and not be. And no matter where your stance is, if you don't want to talk about it or if you just want to have a neutral ground about it, it still affects you.
right. Because how can you say one group of women is being impacted in a way that another group of women are not being impacted or they're not being impacted as much? That's a political statement right there.
Not even being able to say the word black when you're
Mm,
asked about black maternal mortality and morbidity in the United States, and you can't even say the word black because it's not quote unquote inclusive, that's bullshit. Excuse me,
right.
but it is.
Right. And then looking at the people we have in office right now, that's a whole different rabbit hole. But I think it goes back even further than what we see as politics today. I'm gonna
Hmm.
say it goes back to what was that book that came out? I think it was the 1300s, The Hammer and the Witches.
Oh
And
yeah.
yes, The Hammer and the Witches, and they actually mentioned midwives in this book. I don't know, y'all. This is one of those books where you have to really, there's a trigger warning throughout the entire book when it talks about what they propose to do to women, specifically midwives. Because in the book, it said that the biggest threat to the Catholic Church are midwives. And this is
Right.
what we need to do to them. And that book came out in the 1300s. And that book kind of trails where we are today.
And
So,
that's crazy. That's 1300s.
come
We're in
on now.
2026. America wasn't even founded.
Hmm.
I mean, and that's crazy.
It's crazy.
That's
Yeah,
that is crazy.
it's crazy. So as we celebrate um the anniversary, it was the 250 years of the United States, we need to think about things like this that predate the United States that we are still being impacted by today. So let's
Yeah.
dive into it. Let's
Right. So like you're having things from hospital closures to the mortality rates, especially in black communities where black women have higher mortality rates than any other demographic, especially here in Mississippi. Mississippi leads in infant mortality.
Mhm.
It's tied to, power, policy, race, class, access. And with Mississippi's population being what 32, 33% black populated, they have the least access to proper medical care due to location, due to education and knowledge, due to just full on accessibility. And it's literally how the system is set up, because those that be in power, they literally are not trying to make sure that these communities have full on access to medical care. They don't have access to knowledge of the midwives that are there to help them for the mamas who are low risk. And then they're going to the hospitals, and a lot of women, especially in our communities, are being pushed towards cesareans and a lot of interventions. Because why is a low risk mother coming to the hospital at 36 weeks and you saying, oh, it's time for you to start talking about and thinking about what kind of induction you want in 2 weeks? Why are we inducing at 38 weeks? She's low risk and showing no indicators that she needs to be induced.
Mm. Follow the money trail. Follow the money trail and follow the politics of it all.
Right.
So again, how can you be in this work? How can you be in birth work? How can you be a midwife? How can you be a doula? How can you be any of these things without addressing the politics that are involved? Because if you're not addressing the politics that are involved, you are not properly caring for the people that you said you're caring for.
Right. I mean, like right now in Mississippi, there's an entire lawsuit with the CNMs suing the state because they want to have access to come from physician oversight. They cannot go to home births. Now, I believe in like states like New York that they can. The CNMs there can go to home births, but here in good old Mississippi, no, they cannot go to the home births. They have to be under physician oversight. They want to work with you and having collaborative care, which I do support. Yes, sometimes you do need collaborative care, but those nurse midwives can't even come out of the hospital and practice on their own if they want to have a birth center. And did you know that it's against the law to have a birth center in Mississippi, Francine?
Yes, 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 yes. You know, you mentioned New York, and as soon as you mentioned New York, I had to think about Illinois because I had my last home birth was in Illinois, and my midwife said, in case of emergency, if we have to go to the hospital, I'm not your midwife, I'm your doula. And you cannot tell them that I'm a midwife, I am your doula. And I'm getting chills just thinking about that. That was my entrance into, wait a minute, what the hell is going on here? That was
Yeah,
years.
that
Yeah.
that is crazy. And I have seen in some instances where that does occur. Um and the fact that midwives are being criminalized for being midwives. I mean, let's face it, midwifery has literally been here since the test of time, since people have started roaming the earth and women have been having babies. Midwifery is cultural, midwifery is traditional, midwifery literally is the earth's longest profession.
Hmm.
And for you to criminalize and want to regulate something that has been on earth longer than you have been breathing, that's like going outside and making the rain a bad guy for watering the trees out in the forest. It's
Mm.
stupid. Like that makes no sense. Like how can you possibly sit here and want to regulate how healthy low risk moms can have birth? How
Yeah.
can you regulate and tell moms who may possibly have higher risk that they cannot have collaborative care and work with midwives even in their postpartum era? How can you sit here and tell people who are already, based off of how the system has conditioned their lifestyle, how can you sit here and tell these mothers in those communities that based off of their government funded healthcare and insurance that they have to do it the way the state wants them to do it. How can you sit here and go into these mothers' private spaces and pull up a computer or a laptop or a tablet and criminalize that woman for her right to choose autonomy versus having a cesarean when she realizes that she does not have code indicators of saying that she needs one, but because you don't want her to have one, you want to control her black body. How can you sit here and tell me that's okay?
Right. Can we go back to something you said, Adriana? You said that it is illegal to have birth centers in Mississippi. I think that's something that we need to crack open.
Yes. And a lot of the midwives here are saying that they want some those who want to have birth centers, they have appealed, they have put in bills, they have petitioned, and for some reason legislative is not hearing the need for it because they say it's too much like a hospital, and if they want to give birth in a hospital like setting, they can just go to the hospital.
But ding 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 ding, access to hospitals. Like
I
many people don't
mean,
have access to hospitals. They're not close. So if we had more
exactly.
birth centers,
And Mississippi is a rural state.
come on.
Majority of Mississippi is a rural state. And then the government currently just passed like grants to go into rural areas and have healthcare centers there. Or you can have a birth center. Like the OBGs are not there, so you can literally have an entire birth center that's less than 20 miles away. Like it can literally be in walking distance in these rural communities. But hey, here's a grant to have another fast space put up.
Yeah.
That's not a birth center. You come in and labor in fast space, and they're gonna look at you like, "Oh my gosh, what do we do?"
Mm.
Because that's out of their scope of expertise.
Now, I have heard, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Adriana, because I have heard with this argument back and forth that birth houses, people can have birth houses, but they can't have birth centers.
Yes and no. It's considered a birth center if you have more than 5 births in that home that year. So it's kind of like a Airbnb kind of thing. Like, hey, you don't want to have a birthday at your house, but you come and have a birthday at my house as long as you don't exceed having 5 births in my house.
To me, this seems like an attack on indigenous births as well
Yeah.
because people, you have your home, you have your farm, the women come to your home, they come to your farm, and you give birth right there. There was a midwife that I met, this was years ago, and I think she's transitioned, but years ago, because she was an elder. She was the Cherokee woman in Georgia, and she gave, people came to her home and they gave birth right at her home. But if she were in Mississippi, then she wouldn't be able to take more than 5 women. And that's very unrealistic in a rural area.
Yeah. And 5 births a year is crazy,
Yeah,
especially as a traditional midwife. Like
especially.
5 births a year. I mean, you have culture. You literally have communities like the Mennonites and Amish community in rural Mississippi, for that matter.
Hmm.
and to say like if that's the only community as a traditional midwife that you're serving, 5 births a year in your home, you already become a birth center because you might get 5 births in a month
Yeah,
in
it's
one of those
criminal.
communities. It's criminal. So
It's
now
criminal.
you'll be criminalized for it. You'll have fines you have to pay. And then you have to go down this whole rabbit hole of where if they find out that you're continuing to do it, then you'll be discontinued. And it just be why are midwives being criminalized for something that has been around longer than the legislature has been alive?
It's criminal. And I know, I mean, this is kind of going off of. what you just said, a question just popped in my head. The Amish and the Mennonites, do they have any kind of religious, you know, rights to go around that rule?
And they do until it's known of something happening to the baby. Then it becomes a whole issue.
So
Not if
basically,
something happens to the mother, something happens to the baby.
mm, so basically, it's still being practiced underground because it's still underground. Then.
I mean, in a sense, technically it could be, yeah, you can consider it underground, but I mean, they're operating based on their religious aspects in a traditional sense. And when you have these different lawsuits popping up across different states and trying to attack traditional midwifery, yeah. And because you still have communities in America who operate under their religion and do not go to hospitals. They do not go to healthcare facilities. They go to the midwives, and the midwives are their current healthcare. And so not only that, you're not only violating just midwifery, you're violating your citizens' constitutional rights, their First Amendment right, their right to have religious freedom.
Adriana, you just said something else too. You said that if something happens to the baby, not necessarily the mother, but if something happens to the baby, and the first thing I thought of, again, listen, I'm not trying to attack anybody's beliefs, their background, religion, any of that. But when you said that, the first thing I thought about was the Catholic Church. Well, there's definitely something that trickled down. And you again hammering the witches, if you want to really review this book that came out in the 1300s. That's something that trickled down. Save the baby if the mother, if something happens to the mother, save the baby. And that's
Yeah,
a whole nother political conversation that we don't have to get into, but that came to my mind when you said that.
yeah. And then you have to look at the insurance barriers that come with it too.
Mm,
Like, like some folks' insurance don't even allow them to stay in ICU. They could still not be breathing on their arm, need a feeding tube. Something can happen to them in birth and be in a coma. And if she's in that coma, she's got to go to hospice care
mm,
after a week.
after a week.
like insurance is also BS because how? How can you sit here and tell me I'm paying you hundreds of dollars a month, whether it's through my employer or it's coming from my own private pocket? How can you sit here and tell me that I'm paying you this money, but you can't use what I'm paying you to that for that coverage? You're telling me that you can't cover my hospital stay, or that I'm going to the hospital because I have a high risk pregnancy and it ends in a cesarean, and now I'm stuck with $108,000 hospital bill that my insurance still hasn't covered anything on, but I'm paying
Mm,
you to cover. Or let's take it a step further, back to those communities who are low income communities and on Medicaid, on WIC, and then you're pushing formula mostly in the Black communities instead of encouraging them to get lactation consultants to breastfeed their babies, which in my opinion, that's what I would do if I were the government. Oh, let's encourage breastfeeding for those mamas who can, because we can pay for the lactation consultants who can make sure that these mamas are able to feed their babies and it's more cost efficient. But no, in these certain communities, let's push infant formula. And I'm not knocking infant formula. Sometimes it's needed. Sometimes mamas, they cannot produce the way they need to. The babies may not get the nutrients that they need to, and that's when it comes in beneficial to have infant formula. I'm not knocking it. And then some moms, they just don't want to breastfeed. And that's completely okay. That's her bodily autonomy and choice. And that's how she chose to feed her baby, as long as that baby is fed. But the fact that in majority of hospitals, and I can even speak for myself, when I had my firstborn, I know for a fact they come rolling in there with those little micro bottles of Similac, saying this would be good if you don't want to feed, while I'm sitting there with my baby to my breast.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, no, I'm good. But why don't you just try giving it to her? I don't want to give that to her. But why do you keep forcing this on me? Or, well, what if dad wants to feed? What? you know, and the insurance won't cover. Blue Cross Blue Shield does not cover lactation consultations and services. Last I read here in the state of Mississippi.
I think some of that is the thinking is, in which the thinking is flawed, but I think the thinking is, if this woman breastfeeds, how are we going to get her back into the workforce? Because she has to feed into the system. She has to get on this hamster wheel, but she's breastfeeding.
So,
Not taking into consideration a woman can pump. You know.
right. So there's this conspiracy theory, and there are articles that actually support factual evidence that Nestle, who is a huge,
Come on.
that's a huge, what you call it, people who produce it, they go and advocate to push legislative to not encourage longer maternity leave, because mothers will then breastfeed their babies and they lose money. Like, they literally go and advocate to say, hey, you need to keep shorter maternity um leave so that the workers can get back to work. They get discouraged pumping, and then they'll start formula feeding.
And that's political.
And that's
That
political.
that is political. Nestle is a huge political company, so much so that when I lived in rural Venezuela, the government was trying to kick Nestle out of the country because it is a big political company. Yeah. So you can't say you're a midwife, you're in birth work, and you're not political.
I mean,
Everything you touch is political.
it is on record that one of the CEOs for Nestle has said that water is not even a human right,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
a natural resource. So let's back up. A natural resource
That's needed to breastfeed because you got to drink water. You got to stay hydrated.
was is not needed. Is not a human right. But y'all go up here and y'all advocate to push against maternal leave, paternal leave. Like, you literally go up here and lobby against that. Like, that is just crazy to me. But here's the crazy part about it. Their own workers get up to about 18 weeks, 12 to 18 weeks of maternity leave.
Mm,
But you're forcing someone who's working at Wendy's to be back at work between 4 to 6 weeks after she pushed her whole baby out, or if she had a cesarean, she's on her feet after having a major surgery, abdominal surgery. That means that she's gonna need her core to stand, right?
hmm Like serious surgery. People say, "Oh, C-section." No, 7 layers, dear. 7 layers. Abdominal surgery, serious surgery, and she doesn't get the recovery time that an athlete would get. Come on
Mm-mm.
now.
And some athletes won't sit their behind down because they want to get back to it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another conversation for another day. Is the whole snapback culture, girl? If you don't go sit yourself down and rest,
Oh yeah. Yeah, I think we're gonna have to talk about the snapback culture, especially with everything that's going on with body dysmorphia,
ugh,
and we need to dive into that. But
yes.
yeah.
And just it's just the targeting. And then you have people who literally sat at the feet of the grand midwives. We are going to call them what they are, the grand midwives. These are the mamas of obstetrics. Let's be real. They are the women who are literally who the current obstetrical curriculum is based off of learning. And without midwifery, there would be no OBGYNs.
Mm-hmm.
Let's make that very clear. The mother of obstetrics is midwifery. It is the origin. It is the blueprint. It is where obstetrical care has originated in the medical industry. And the targeting of the midwives at the turn of the century, so that they have to get a license to practice doing something that they had been doing. And then you open more and more hospitals because now you can make more and more money off of having these babies. And then you tell them, oh, now that you have hit a certain age, it's time for you to retire. Who are you to tell me to when and how to retire?
Exactly. Well, traditionally, the older women would do this anyway.
Hmm.
Yeah.
It was
Um.
all. It was normally all the older women. That's the reason why they coined they coined the term granny midwives, because majority of the time it was the older women.
Yeah. Yeah. So today, so from granny midwives to today, we see legislation or things happening in the political arena in Georgia and in Mississippi. You kind of alluded to that in the very beginning. Let's talk about that. What is going on in Georgia in recent news and what's going on right now in Mississippi?
They are getting ready to start. Well, they aren't getting ready. They have been targeting the Georgia midwives and finding them and telling them that they could not practice. So now there's a lawsuit about three, if I'm correct, I believe it's three midwives who have come together and filed a lawsuit against the state to continuously practice in a traditional NCPM stance and have these birth centers. If I'm not mistaken, in the state of Georgia, and this is something that Mississippi can also take note on, but in the state of Georgia, um, a midwifery without a license is restricted. So you do have to have some type of licensure just to practice in Georgia. You have to. It's you have to be a CPM. You have to be a licensed midwife. But you cannot practice traditionally, is what it said, unless you're like quote unquote underground. Um which
And
is
then if you're
also crazy.
underground, and being underground is a risk though,
Hmm.
a huge risk for for criminalization.
Well, it's like you said, like the midwife that you were working with in Illinois, and she said, if I'm going to this hospital, I am your doula, not your midwife.
Hmm.
And don't tell them I'm a midwife. There are some midwives, even here in Mississippi, that has said that if we happen to go in, that I operate in the capacity as your doula, and do not tell them that I am your midwife.
Yeah.
And that's where we as midwives also have to be, accountable in when we are in those sacred spaces with these mamas too. But we have to also look at it, because if they're saying it in that capacity, it looks like you're doing something illegal.
Hmm.
And if you openly say that and in front of the medical staff, then there's going to be a lot of questions. And you genuinely cannot operate in that capacity. You have to openly say, look, I will be there to support you in the doula capacity. You but to say, don't tell them that I am a midwife. Like, are you a midwife or are you impersonating a midwife? That's
Mm-hmm.
how it looks. It looks suspicious, not just to your client, but also to the medical staff and anyone who has overheard that being said. You know, covering your logo or not, having that warm transfer of care for your client, to me, that's just very questionable. However, you know, those kind of instances play into what the medical system already has in their mindset about midwives. So we have to be very conscientious of what we are saying to our clients, and how we are also acting in that capacity, because that can be harmful to not just the mamas. It's harmful to our community as midwives, and what we are practicing is harmful to what we're trying to build and make sure that these mothers have for safe care. We have to be conscientious in how wording plays, and laws will take how your words, what your words are said in that moment, and then once it's put on that paper in black and white, that's law.
Yeah, there has to be an education. You have to
Mm-hmm.
educate your client as well and build the relationship with that client. Yeah.
Yeah. And it goes back to like with the grand midwives, they stood on business, but then you have people who come in and sat at their feet, learn their culture, and then went and gentrified it and sold it.
And then you get the popularization of home birth in the 1970s
Right,
by a certain group
1970.
of people.
Right. Like they literally go and gentrify what the grand midwives had already built after
Yep.
sitting at their feet. But I mean, that also is just culture in general. They come into our communities and learn our culture, and then go and slap a new name on it, gentrify it, and now it's hip, and it's crazy because when you look at it, like midwifery related here in the state of Mississippi, there were grand midwives. At one point, there were like 101 grand midwives across Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia. Right?
Now give the number today. Give the number today of how many are in Mississippi.
Grand midwives in Mississippi.
Come on.
There are none.
Right. Now we could say, okay, well, they've passed away, and but then what about their students?
I feel like in Mississippi, there is one, maybe two midwives that could possibly be considered grand midwives within the next 20 years. Um, because when we say grand midwives, we are talking about the black midwives.
Hmm.
And I know for a fact that in Mississippi there are two, and they don't see it yet, but they will be considered the grand midwives within the next 10. I wouldn't even give them 20 years, maybe the next 5 to 10 years, right?
And will
And
you? I want you to hear what she's saying, y'all. Two,
two
two.
out of the entire state,
Mm-hmm.
there are for certain three black midwives in the entire state of Mississippi. Three. When it comes to midwives collectively in the state of Mississippi, there are maybe 30 midwives. And that's the nurse midwives, traditional midwives, licensed with CPM midwives, which are basically traditional midwives with access to certain vaccinations and drugs, and direct entry and traditional are collective. So between those three types of midwives, it's about 30 midwives across the state of Mississippi, that has 82 counties. And of those 82 counties, This is crazy. Of those 82 counties, 70 of them are rural.
And of those 30 midwives you mentioned, all of them can't do home births.
Mm-mm. Of those 30 midwives, there are about 15 that can do home births
In the entire state
in
of
the
Mississippi.
entire state of Mississippi.
All right.
In the entire state of Mississippi. Let's sit with that.
Yes, an entire state of Mississippi. And how do we get here? We briefly mentioned the historical targeting of granny midwives, briefly mentioned how racism impacts maternal outcomes, while at the same time, home birth was gentrified at the feet of these granny midwives.
Yep. And then you take in body autonomy, you take in reproductive justice, you take in how racism is affecting the maternal outcomes to where we are today. You're taking in classism that affects economic inequalities. You're taking into insurance barriers that's affecting both policy, racist classism, um, autonomy, the way to practice. It is so many different barriers, so many different levels, so many different layers that affects how midwives can practice. Mississippi is an unregulated state currently, but there has been talks in legislature yearly about where we stand in Mississippi, um, and how to keep midwifery in Mississippi. We need to make sure that our midwives are able to give substantial, competent, safe care to our mothers, especially here in Mississippi because of how rural it is, with healthcare deserts popping up, hospitals closing, like even on the Gulf Coast, which is popping with tourism, right? They have closed hospitals there. So we have to be conscientious in our fight to maintain these maternity care deserts. Um, I know as a student where I'm located, there are three OBGYN offices and two hospitals that do have labor and delivery care within a 10-minute drive from me. The problem is if you are a critical mom or in need or have twins, you cannot birth here locally where I am. You would have to go to the state capital to one of the hospitals there because they do not have the facilities and the capacity to handle a multiple birth. And that's locally.
And how far of a drive is that? Say, how far of a drive is that?
It's an hour and 15-minute drive
Imagine, y'all.
in labor with twins. And you have to drive an hour and 15 minutes to go and have your babies. And there
Have any
is
like
only I'm serious, and there's only in my area within a 30-mile radius in my area, there is only two midwives, maybe three, that cover rural areas for home birth midwifery. And two of those three midwives have to travel an hour just to get there. So let's sit with that. Let's sit with that. That where I'm located in Mississippi, there's one traditional midwife that is local. There are two other midwives that may possibly can cover this area, but they have to drive about an hour. Both of them have CPMs. Both of them are also traditionally trained. And there's only one traditional midwife that is local, and she's more direct entry than traditional because it wasn't passed through traditional. She was kind of like pulled into it through an apprenticeship in a 30-mile radius. I recently had a client reach out looking for a doula last week. No, not a doula, a midwife last week. And she was in Gloucester, Mississippi. That was about a 20-minute drive from me. And she expressed that there were some disparities with her care team. And she wanted a midwife, but she could not afford a midwife.
And her care team was at a hospital?
And her care team was an hour north of her in Natchez.
Gracious.
And she had some choice words, but it was understandable with how she felt. And she wanted to have her baby at home. She is low risk based off of like what I talked to her about in her consultation. But none of the where she's located, because she's like in that area between Mississippi and Louisiana, right on that state line area.
Mm-hmm.
The closest midwife to her is literally about 30-40 minutes away.
Mm.
So, midwifery in Mississippi, we are actively working. We are actively trying to make sure that all of our mamas are covered. We are working to make sure that our communities are covered in the Delta, in South Mississippi, Southwest Mississippi, and Central Mississippi. We are actively trying to cover as much mileage as we possibly can to ensure these moms have safe, confident care. Um,
In the midst of a crisis and a state of
in the midst,
emergency.
right,
Yeah.
right. So we're advocating, we're putting in that work, but we also need our communities to come behind us because in order to have a community midwife, we need the community behind the midwife.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons that we launched this podcast. It's for educational purposes, of course, because the community needs to know what's going on. I think sometimes, midwives are always working, working, working. And sometimes the community does not know the state that we're in, you know?
Right.
So,
And if you have any birth stories about having to birth at home or wanting to birth at home or just having beautiful birth stories about birthing with any of the Mississippi midwives, by all means, reach out to us. Tell us your stories. We would love to tell them. And if you want to come and tell us about your stories, come and tell us. And we would love to sit and hold space for you. You can send us an email at Mississippi at midwifery. Let's start that back over. You can send an email to midwifery in the sip podcast at gmail.com.
yes, midwifery and the sip podcast at gmail.com.
And of course, we would love to hear your birth stories or even hold space if you would like to tell us about your birth stories here in the state of Mississippi. Especially if you are in a rural area and had a midwife or had to travel, we would love to hold space for you.
Yes, please do that. Adriana. I was
All right.
like, I mean, I
That's it
know
for today.
it's heavy. I mean, this is heavy work. This is
It
heavy
is
work.
heavy work.
And I care for women who have the unfortunate occasion of unfortunate circumstance of losing a child or
Mhm.
infant death, miscarriage, and all of it is heavy work. All of it is heavy work. People might say, "Well, you how do you even deal with that constant dealing with women who have had miscarriages and infant death?" But it's all heavy work.
It
All of it
is.
is heavy work.
It
All
is.
of it is heavy work. So, and
Yeah.
I feel like even listening to this podcast, I'm feeling the energy in my body right now. So if you are a listener, please do your self care work. Take care of yourself as you digest all of this that's going on. We're going to take care of ourselves as we tell you all of this stuff that's going on, as our bodies try to process it, our minds try to process it. Just really, really hone in on your self care.
Mhm.
Please.
Absolutely. Because self-care is very necessary, you know, in especially in the climate, politically, in the climate, you know, economically, where everyone is. Take care of you.
Yes.
Take care of you.
Yes.
All right.
Well, Adriana,
Until next time.
until next time, y'all, thank you for tuning in to Midwifery and the Sip. And we definitely appreciate all of you for listening in and supporting the podcast. And again, if you have any stories that you want to tell about giving birth in Mississippi, definitely send an email to us at midwifery in the sip podcast at gmail.com, and talk to you later. Chapeace
Peace.
Salachi.
Peace, love.